Let me relate to you briefly a conversation that I had many years ago. I remember this conversation took place. We were sitting in a certain spot in the Ir HaAtika in Yerushalayim. A conversation I had with Professor Hillel Weiss. Professor Hillel Weiss is a very religious and right-wing, ideologically speaking, individual, very ideologically very, very healthy and robust, shall we say. And he's part of the academic world. His field is Hebrew literature. He said to me that you know as well as I that there are many people who wear a kippah and keep all or many of them mitzvot, but really they are meshumadim. And he went on to explain. He says, not necessarily in actions that one can point to, but in terms of their thinking, in terms of their opinions, their value system, they become meshumadim. That is to say, they quickly learn that in order to advance in their field, particularly the academic world he was referring to, you have to fit in, you have to adopt certain views, and you will suffer if you do not do so. And he said, I've seen many people who, 20, 30 years ago, their opinions were what you would call, I suppose, generally much more right-wing, much more ideologically committed. And over time, this point of view is constantly being whittled away at until eventually they think like others. They are most definitely affected by the people with whom they have to rub shoulders, the people who have some influence of their career trajectory and other aspects of their lives. They are constantly bombarded by all kinds of views and ideas on the news, newspapers, and because those who oppose the Torah, at least some of them, are very dedicated and very talented, over time a person can really be convinced, or at least think that it's not so terrible to think so, or it's reasonable to assume such a thing. So that, yes, this is a problem. We see this all over the place. How else do you explain, for example, something which I saw recently? There is a certain midrasha for young women in Yerushalayim, known as Midrashet or Michlelet Lindenbaum. And I happened to recently see an interview with the person, the Rav, who is the head of this institution, has been for, I think, 20 odd years or more. And he was explaining, and he was very proud of this, that when we began our program for young religious women, that is, we're talking about 18-year-old, 19-year-old girls, who wanted to join the army in Israel, and we started a program for them to prepare them for the army, and then to maintain contact with them, etc., throughout their time in the army. We had two, I think he said 2 or 3 girls at the beginning, and now I don't remember the number now. I think it's I think something like 200 or something. And this has been going on for something like 2 decades. He spoke about thousands of young women who, through that program that he initiated, that he promoted. There are thousands of young women who have gone down that path. And he was extremely proud of this achievement, so to speak. And he said, when we began, it was a big discussion. There were many people against and opposed, and it wasn't acceptable. It wasn't Zelaya Makubal. And now, in his words, I'm quoting him, he said, "Achshav ze passé." Now it's old hat. It's all, everyone accepts it. Everyone thinks it's fine and normal, wonderful. It's a tremendous achievement. So where did this particular individual, a rabbi, where did he get the idea that this is such a, not only mutar, which is something that no serious, notable Talmid Chachamim, Ba'al Halacha, has ever expressed such a view, to the best of my knowledge. The one or two people that I could mention do not fit that description. So where did he get the idea that such a view, such a philosophy, and not just thinking certain things, but acting on it, and actively promoting the idea that young women should go to the army, which, by the way, goes without saying that the moment any person, man, a girl or boy, goes to the army at a young age, which is still a very impressionable age usually, it goes without saying, everyone understands that this is the case. The army is not a bastion of Torah. It is a very secular organization. It has become much more so over the last 30 odd years. Something which has been documented and presented very clearly in a book by an Israeli right-wing journalist by the name of Naved Daromi. The name of her book is Prahim Bakane, literally flowers in the barrel of the rifle, which explaining how what we call today, the term didn't even exist way back then when these things began, but the woke radical so-called progressives, which of course is a euphemism for the opposite, for regression and disaster, how these people have infiltrated the army on every level. Just a day or two ago, it was on the news that in one of the famous technological intelligence related units in the army, known as Yechidat 8200, the soldiers were required to attend what was supposed to be, what was advertised as a lecture speaking about sexual harassment within the army and how this will not be tolerated. It goes without saying, of course, if you don't have young men and young women whose hormones are at peak levels working together, then you're not going to have sexual harassment. But no one mentioned that, apparently. It was supposedly to be, it was advertised, it was said to be a discussion about that, but in fact there was a brief discussion of that, and then a much, much longer lecture by someone else describing how they had come out of the closet and had and so what's called coming out of the closet, and freely openly announcing their whatever sexual preference or inclination that they happen to believe in today. It might be different, of course, next week. One doesn't know. That was the lion's share of the evening, and they were required to attend. Okay, This was, of course, later denied by certain higher-ups in the army, but those are the facts. It goes without saying that if you send young people to such an organization, this is a step, this is a decision which is fraught with danger, spiritual danger. Only a total fool could not see this. So how is it possible that a so-called rabbi decides that he has to dedicate 2 or more decades to this idea of making this something normal and acceptable? Was it based on Torah thinking, or was it based on by a process of osmosis, accepting all kinds of ideas about feminism, that whatever men can do, women can do and should do, and if secular Israeli girls go to the army, then obviously this, by definition, proves and implies and proves and requires that religious girls do the same thing, because how can it be that a secular girl does something a religious girl does not do? Once upon a time in Israel, it was, which is also very dubious and questionable, but it was the norm in the Zionist religious world in Israel that young women did Shirut Leumi, literally national service. They did not go to the army. I'm not saying it's a great idea either, but it's not as bad as going to the army. This was something that was, people were proud of this, that these girls were doing Shirut Leumi. It was not considered in some way insufficient, or it was not a problem that secular girls are doing something different, because religious people understood, or at least the Rabbanim understood, and they were able to convince most of the religious communities that they should follow this and accept this position, that religious girls don't belong in such a situation where there will be a constant interaction with secular people, B, with people of the opposite sex, etc., etc. But over time, that became an old-fashioned and benighted attitude. Obviously, we must do whatever the secular Jews do. So if they do this, we must do that. If their daughter goes to the army, my daughter has to go to the army. Let me also mention in passing that you will probably not be shocked to hear that this particular rabbi in question does not sport a beard. Why is that? Any particular reason, do you think? Did he learn from Jewish sources that is a proper way to behave, to appear? Or is this again part of that process of becoming a mishumad, following, copying, emulating that which is done by others with whom you're rubbing shoulders? I'll leave you to figure that out for yourself. Now that I think about it for a moment, there's almost no Rabbanim, so-called or not so-called, who support such a position. But another one who comes to my mind is also beardless. Is this surprising? No, it's not surprising in the least, because it's all part of the pattern. It's all part of this anthropological social reality of people not being able to define for themselves who they are and live by that, but rather allowing themselves to be manipulated and influenced and thus to adopt other opinions, other views. This is just one example.
Rabbi, we also see this in the judicial sphere.
Yes, we do. Of course we do. these people know, and they are correct, almost without exception, that if they do not become such so-called meshumadim, if they do not accept all kinds of ideas and assumptions, they will not be promoted. They will not receive a higher position. They will not be considered for a higher court or what have you. We see this all the time, and we see it, of course, now. Much of what is being discussed right now in Israel with regards to judicial reform. What will be at the end of the day, we do not know. We shall wait and see. But the very discussion amongst the leftists, the so-called progressives, etc., is if you know who these people are, then it's no longer really surprising. But the fact that there are also certain religious people who are very outspoken and adopt these views show to what extent they have been brainwashed, so that which is the norm in all so-called democratic countries, that judges are selected and confirmed by elected representatives of the public. This is how it is in all countries that you might think of, whether it's New Zealand or United States or France or Finland. But somehow, if someone suggests that that should also be the case in Israel, that is literally, quite literally, the beginning of the descent into fascist Nazism. These are the words used by these people. And again, some of them are rabbis, so-called. How did this happen? Where do these ideas come from? The real answer is we're talking about a religion. These ideas, these philosophies, these attitudes are part of a philosophical religious reality. And it's possible, unfortunately, to maintain a certain kind of religious lifestyle in many areas, but within, in one's mind and one's heart, to be completely off the derech. In other words, to think and view things through a pair of spectacles that are anything but Torah spectacles. Such a thing is possible, and it's becoming increasingly possible. And we see this all the time. So you can, we've discussed here people in the academic world, in the judicial world, but you can also see it on a much simpler, more commonplace level in Israeli society. I myself can tell you about people that I know, young people. In one case I'm thinking of is a young woman who, today she's in her early 30s, shall we say. She came from a non-religious background. She was Hazeret B'Teshuvah of her own volition at an early age, I think 16 or 17 or something like that. And she was very proud of her new religious identity. And she was, at that time, she was very, she dressed according to halakha, long sleeves, she covered her hair, etc. When she got married, she married a young man from a religious background. But he also, over time, became much less committed, shall we say, to the Torah. There's a fairly lukewarm attitude, shall we say, and that's number one, which that has an impact on the wife as well. If the husband is less Torah oriented, this will rub off on the wife very likely as well. Even more telling is that I know some of her social contacts in her family and what have you, in-laws, when she sees that her sisters-in-law, who once covered their hair, no longer cover their hair because it's becoming increasingly, to quote that great halachic authority, passé. if she sees that her sisters-in-law, who were also once more religious, covered their hair, today do not do so, well, at some point she's going to break. Why should she be the odd woman out? Why should she be what they call in Hebrew the dos? Why should be the which is a terrible term, I think, but that's how it's described. The person who is openly and unashamedly religious is referred to as a dos. So why should she be so? Why should she be, as it were, backward and less forward thinking than her peers? So these kinds of influences are everywhere, and you can see it everywhere you go.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.